Hey everyone, my name is Andrew Warner. I'm the founder of Mixergy.com, home of the ambitious upstart. And today's entrepreneur, Steve Hsu, sold his computer security company, SafeWeb, for $26 million to Symantec just 5 years after launching it. The idea for the business came to him when he was a physics professor at Yale, and he was put in charge of protecting the department's network from hackers. We'll find out how he built the business, why he sold it, what he learned along the way, and also what he's doing now. Stephen, how did I do with that introduction?
That was perfect.
Oh, cool. But I should tell you that I wasn't looking dead at the camera because I've got my notes right here on the screen. I wanted to make sure that I introduced you properly.
Don't worry about it.
All right, so the first question that I've got for you is, what was the problem you were trying to solve?
I think that the general observations I'm going to make about startups will be useful to almost everybody, but the specific situation is a little bit dated. So you have to take yourself back to the late 90s, early 2000s. And in terms of security, the landscape has just changed tremendously. So in those days, the word firewall wasn't really even in broad usage, let alone more sophisticated things like SSL VPNs, which is what we basically developed. So at the time, in the late 90s, I was a physics professor, and I and some students were just setting up Linux boxes around the department because at that time, Linux was kind of a new thing, and we were just saving the department a lot of money by setting up these scientific workstations instead of buying Solaris machines, which at the time was the only way you could get a scientific workstation. So we were setting these things up, and they all just got hacked into right away. And so suddenly we got thrust into this whole world of internet security, and it turned out to be quite fascinating. One of the tools I found in one of the hacked machines was a packet sniffer. And at the time, I had never seen anything like it. And I realized I didn't really understand things like TCP/IP very well and encryption, and I just started getting interested in it. And my student and I, we just said, I have to tell you that the job situation in theoretical physics is very competitive, and so you have a lot of smart people who are trained in the field, but they end up leaving the field, like Nathan Myhrvold, for example. And so I told my student, I said, there's probably a lot of interesting stuff here because we're going through this internet revolution, and I bet there are more interesting things for you to do in technology than maybe in our academic subjects. So let's just keep our eyes open. He said, sure. So we were thinking about it, and one of the things we looked at was SSL, which was quite new at the time. So it was SSL was a collaboration between Netscape and Microsoft. Even though they were competitors at that time, strategic competitors, they both realized that in order for e-commerce to work, that some kind of security would have to be enabled, and it would have to be universal so people could engage in e-commerce. And so the SSL, yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I just want to ask a question, make sure that I'm understanding. Were you helping him were you guys thinking up a business together, or were you just helping him find a project that was interesting? What was the motivation there?
Yeah, good question, actually. I mean, we were still doing our academic research in particle physics, but I just had the feeling, I guess maybe because I have it turns out, I guess it's true, some entrepreneurial instincts. And also my brother had started a software company. So I was saying to my student, Jim, who became the CTO of the company, I said, hey, we should think about starting a company. I bet we can think up some interesting ideas that can become a company, and we should be open to that. So that was the idea, actually.
I see. Interesting, because the research that I saw was, I guess, presenting more of a PR story around this, that you found some hackers had invaded your system, you found a way to solve the problem for Yale, and then you thought, well, maybe this could have bigger potential.
That's a little bit of a compressed description. What really happened is we were thrust into that problem because of the incident that happened. We started thinking about, in general, because we're physicists, so we were thinking in general in an abstract way about TCP/IP and encryption and all that stuff, VPNs. And then we did it with the idea that we might start a company if we had a good idea, but we didn't have a good idea right away. And then eventually we had it. In fact, I had the idea while I was visiting a research institute in Korea, and I emailed Jim, or I called Jim, I think, to tell him the idea, and we noodled around it, and then we decided to start a company around it. So the idea was, at that time, everything was very nascent in terms of internet security. There were no firewalls. In fact, at universities today, you'd be shocked that, like, the server that is sitting in front of me on my desk, there's no firewall between it and the internet. So universities are just totally like the Wild West. Nowadays, every company is totally locked down. There's a firewall, and there's an intranet, and then the only connection outward is through that firewall, and that's the usual architecture now. But at the time, that was not widespread at all. And so we looked at the SSL spec. I don't want to get into all the maybe your viewers are not that interested in all the details, but we looked at the SSL spec, and at the time, people were only thinking about using it to securely send credit card numbers. Even email over SSL was not at that time. There was nobody doing it. We thought about that as well, but there were some competitors already in that space. And we were thinking of using SSL as a way to build VPNs. At the time, VPNs, and even now, there's a proprietary way of building the encryption for VPNs, which uses something called IPsec. And it turns out that's actually cumbersome. You have to have a client on your machine to use IPsec. And we said, hey, the spec for SSL that Netscape and Microsoft are working on is very high quality. It's a first-rate encryption library set of protocols. We could build a whole VPN based on SSL, and then the client would be the browser, which is going to be on every device. So even then,
I'm sorry to interrupt. We got to stop and spend a little bit of time here just defining the terms, and then we're gonna spend more time talking about the entrepreneur story than the technology behind it. But
exactly.
Define the entrepreneur story. We do need to define the technology here. So, VPN is what?
VPN is virtual private network. So I should say a little bit about how your packets are routed on the web. They go all over the place, and there's no built-in security. So what was shocking to us about the packet sniffer is once that hacker got control of a few machines in the physics department, he could see a ton of traffic that was traveling around Yale, and he could sniff everybody's conversations, their email, their web traffic.
That's because if I send you an email or if I fill out a form, that data doesn't go, the email doesn't go directly to you, and the form doesn't go directly to the person who created the form.
It's passed many servers
and sent all over the net, and then it reunites at its destination, right?
Correct.
And what these hackers were doing was sniffing individual packets of data.
That's correct. Okay. That's correct. And a VPN is a way to embed some security in all of this, which is to encrypt each packet, to have a encryption handshake between the originator and the receiver, and it's called a public key encryption protocol. And once that's in place, then people in the middle who manage to capture a packet, they capture the packet, but it's encrypted, and they're not able to decrypt it. And a VPN is then something layered over the public internet, which exploits encryption.
Okay.
And so nowadays,
So
nowadays, if you work for a big company and you want to connect in and get to some data that's on a server within Google or something, and you're working outside, guaranteed you're probably going to be doing it through some encrypted pipeline, and that's a VPN.
Okay.
Now, our main innovation was to notice that because the browser was going to be the most widely deployed app, this wasn't obvious in the late 90s, but it was obvious to us, and it's now come true. Since the browser is going to be the most deployed app, and since it will have, for e-commerce reasons, a built-in SSL engine, you have an endpoint that can connect to a VPN. So we need to build the back-end server-side capability that can connect out to any browser. So it could be on your handheld, or in those days it was like science fiction to us that there would be a browser on a handheld, but nowadays you have one. So every remote device then would be a potential entry point into the VPN, and that back-end software and all the technology behind it had not even been conceived, and let alone developed. And so that's what we set out to do.
And what you created in the end was, how did it work? If I understand this right, if I wanted to get to a website and then give that website data, but I didn't trust that website, I went through you first, through SafeWeb, and then you guys routed me over to them. So I would type in a web address that was essentially a SafeWeb address. Then on your site, I would type in the address of the website I want to go to. Then you guys would basically mimic that connection to the site that I'm eventually going to end up with.
Now, I want to, so far I've mainly been discussing what we did in terms of technology. Now, there were actually two applications that we pursued. One was the consumer application, which you just described, which is really more of a privacy service. But ultimately, what we ended up getting acquired for was the enterprise application of it, which is have a server. In our case, we were selling it as an appliance. You install that appliance in your data center right next to the firewall, and any remote users, it's usually employees of a company or business partners who want to access the servers of that company, first connect to our appliance, and then on the back end, our appliance talks to the internal devices. And so that turns out to be, that's now $1 billion market, by the way, SSL VPN. But it turns out the privacy, the consumer privacy aspect of it, although we had millions of users, you could not at that time make any money from users. Users were a huge burn on your capital because bandwidth was quite expensive at that time. There was no there's no kind of unified advertising market, and because at that time there were these huge portal plays that had just incredible amounts of real estate of ad placement inventory. Prices for ads it was our bad luck that when we launched our public service, even though it was intensely popular, we could just not monetize any of that traffic. The situation would be totally different today. If someone built the same privacy service that we had and had the same number of users that we had at that time, it would be profitable instantly. But then it was not true, and so we actually had to switch. We actually had a very painful moment. Now talking about startup management, a very painful moment about a year and a half in, where we just basically had to switch to the enterprise strategy, and that was quite painful. We had to lay off people, and but it's the enterprise strategy that ultimately succeeded for us.
All right, so let's get to that by building up to the story. In fact, let's go back before you even launched the business. You were thinking like an entrepreneur by saying, where's the opportunity in this market? How do I become an entrepreneur in this market? Were you always an entrepreneur? It doesn't seem to me like a physics professor from Yale would be.
I was totally oriented to the academic track my whole life. When I was an undergrad at Caltech, I had all these engineering major friends who they wanted to start companies. They all wanted to go work at Intel or Motorola for a few years, and then they were going to start their company. And I was always like, don't bother me. I'm trying to learn general relativity. Okay. But I guess I had some influence. My brother was an engineer and he started a company. And so I sort of was always interested in the topic and the issue. I just didn't think I was going to do it. And then what happened was when I was a professor, I just saw that this internet thing was blowing up. And I just said to my student, I said, this is crazy. There are lots of interesting, even just at the intellectual level, there are a lot of interesting problems to be solved here. Let's go look at it. And that's basically what got me into it.
I see. Okay. All right. So then you come across this idea. You're still a professor when you launch it?
That's right. I'm still a professor now, actually.
Were you still a professor throughout the building of the business, or at some point you have to decide?
I had to take a leave of absence from the university to run the company. And I don't want to get into academic politics because probably most of your users don't give a shit about it. But most departments are not very encouraging of professors to do this kind of thing. There are a few departments now, like computer science departments, maybe some engineering departments. They are encouraging of this. But in a physics department, people are very traditional, and they're like, why are you wasting your time on this? Why aren't you solving fundamental problems in physics? And so I took a leave. I was gone for about a year and a half. I was in the CEO role. I was living in Silicon Valley at the time. But at the end, my department chair just said, look, you either come back or you resign your tenured position. And for family reasons, my wife is also a professor here. Basically, I couldn't really do that, so I had to come back. And I can tell you some interesting strategic things that happened to our company because we were right in the middle of a fundraising round at that time, which actually were impacted by my having to give up the CEO role. I could get into that later, but if you're interested.
Wow, absolutely, I'm interested. I'm almost. Let's not jump ahead. Let's have people listen to that point. I'd love to find out about that because I can't imagine somebody saying I'm going to go pick being a professor over entrepreneurship or any part of business.
Well, remember, I'm not in that way. I'm not your typical entrepreneur because I wasn't really imagining that role for myself through most of my life. So.
Okay, so let's continue then with the story. You launched the business. Actually, you're a professor. You have this idea. What do? Do you just go and incorporate the way the rest of us would?
We went and incorporated. Actually, one thing I learned is that the cheap incorporation, do-it-yourself incorporations are often not done well. And when you get some venture money, the expensive attorney goes and redoes the whole thing. So now I'm not a lawyer, but at least what I've been told by them, and of course it's in their interest, these expensive lawyers, to say this, but it's probably true. We were told that you guys did it, but you basically effed it up. And we're going to redo it for you, no big deal. But if you left it in this fucked up situation, when the acquisition came, it would be a big problem. And the attorney was probably right. But just a little warning to people out there.
Yeah, from the venture capitalists who I've interviewed here on Mixergy, that what I've learned is that they want you to use a lawyer that works with venture capital, that works with investors. And if you don't, they either are going to have a tough time untangling it, or they're just going to walk away. And in your case, it seems like it was relatively easy, and they just said, let's reincorporate.
Nothing had really happened. Nothing substantive had really happened in the company, so it was easy to basically redo it. Now, that was in the old days. I believe that Paul Graham and I forgot the name of his
Y Combinator.
I think Y Combinator has generated a set of legal documents that now anybody can use. So what I just said is probably useless information, but it might be useful for some people. So use the Y Combinator docs and don't use some Delaware $50 incorporation service that's on the web or something. Okay, use something that's really been vetted by real entrepreneurs and startup people.
Was your idea to get funding all along?
It was, at that time, we got our first round of funding around 2000, and actually it was the round closed coincidentally just after the NASDAQ peak. So if you actually plot the NASDAQ number over time, we closed our first round right after that peak. So we were operating subsequently in a tough environment because that was the decline of the first internet bubble. But leading up to it, it was the bubble situation. And so everybody was thinking, get venture capital, get big, raise a ton of money, blah, blah, blah. And, those are totally different. It's a totally different era than what people are experiencing now.
How much money did you guys raise?
A total of $10 million from three sources, two of which were actually hedge funds that, because of the bubble, had started dabbling in VC. And the other investor was an interesting investor. It was called InQtel. It's still existing. It's called InQtel. It's the CIA's venture fund. And because of the security applications of what we were doing, they were quite interested. And so they were one of our investors as well.
How tough was it for you to get funding, considering you didn't have many connections in the space?
It was tough. I think we were helped by the bubble situation a little bit. I hate to say this to people out there, but we were really helped also by personal connection. So it turned out the very first funder, the lead guy, was somebody I had known at Caltech. And so, to be honest, I think if, I don't doubt there are too many people who are still in high school listening to this, but the elite institutions that if you're able to pass through elite institutions in your educational experience, it can turn out to be a huge help, because somebody who knew me when I was 18 and we were doing problem sets together, they really know me. So they're going to take a risk on me. Whereas if I go in and I do a great presentation on Sand Hill Road and, Lightspeed Ventures looking at me, but the guy just has met me like an hour ago, yeah, he might love me, he might invest, but those connections that go way back, those are very strong. And so there is a reason, an engineer who goes to Stanford, he might not learn that much more than at the University of Illinois, but chances are there are going to be some connections if he wants to become an entrepreneur that are going to pay off in the long run. So it's a little advice to you about, to your viewers about elite institutions. I mean, those elite institutions exist for a reason. So
I like how you said we did problem sets together in college, and not that we did shots together in college.
Well, we did that too, but but that would be more of a Caltech thing to say. Problem
more
sets.
Of a Caltech thing, yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so you had a connection, you got your funding, you were in business. What'd you do next? What was the first thing that you did after you got funding?
We had to make a very strategic decision. Now, in the interim, I had moved from Yale to the University of Oregon, so I was living in Eugene, Oregon, which is it's a 1-hour commuter flight from Silicon Valley. We had to make a strategic decision about whether to locate the company in Eugene or whether to locate it in the Bay Area. And this is peak bubble conditions, so the burn rate, hiring engineers, cost of living, everything was much higher in the Bay Area, much cheaper in Eugene. We thought about it very hard. We decided to locate the company in the Bay Area. And I think that turned out to be a very smart decision. And I'd like to talk about that, actually. It's true that your burn rate goes up. It's true that these days you can, especially if you're doing like a Web 2.0-ish software startup, the capital costs are not that much, and you could locate anywhere. But when it comes to raising money and when it comes to getting the company acquired or making business deals, proximity still matters. The ability to say, hey, I'm going to take a meeting. I'm going to go down to San Jose and take a meeting, but it's only going to cost me the morning. It's not going to cost me a plane flight and several days, and that makes a huge difference. And your ability to network and to meet people, it's just much enhanced. So I still would advise people, especially if they're young people who don't have roots anywhere, if you are going to do a company, I still think it's worth going to the Bay Area. And by the way, people who tell you to go to Austin or Boston or Seattle, they're lying to you because there's 10 times as much venture capital. It's much more developed in the Bay Area than anywhere else. I think, in our current company, one of the VCs investing us is in Austin, BC. And, Austin's a nice place. It does have some startup culture, but it's just not this. It's just talking about different orders of magnitude between Austin and the Bay Area.
Do you have a specific example of a benefit that you got because you were living there?
I do. Like the guys we were able to meet with, In-Q-Tel, their offices were in the Bay Area. We were eventually acquired by Symantec, which is in the Bay Area. When the acquisition occurs, there's a little calculation that the acquiring company is going to do. They're going to say, well, how much of the staff, how much of the key personnel of this startup that we're acquiring are we going to lose? And if there's no relocation, they might say, hey, we're not going to lose very many people. We're going to keep the whole team together. But if my team had been in Boise, Idaho, and Symantec wants us to relocate to integrate properly with whatever business unit we're becoming part of, they're going to just say, hey, we're going to lose 50% of the people when we acquire these guys. So there's an issue there. Now, maybe if you're a big enough company when you get acquired that they can just let you be a freestanding unit, then it's not an issue. But in a lot of cases, they're going to want to integrate you into existing teams and things like that. So,
okay, was the original business model based on consumers or enterprise?
We made a strategic decision. The amount of thought that went into all this stuff was pretty significant. We had pretty smart people thinking about all this stuff, and not saying we made the right decisions, but these were very considered decisions. We kind of incorrectly thought that because we had no credibility or background in security, it would be foolish to directly go into the enterprise security space because no one would trust us, no one would buy our products. And we thought, the consumer thing, on the other hand, well, there's no track record. I mean, all these consumer businesses like Yahoo, they didn't exist a couple years earlier, and they just appeared. So basic credibility seemed to us to be more of an issue if you were trying to sell to IBM than if you were trying to sell to Joe Smith in Peoria. And that's why we chose consumer first. I think now, knowing a little bit more about the industry, security was very nascent in those days too. So it wasn't like actually there were that many competitors that had, strong credibility or brand name. So we probably could have just gone directly into enterprise space and saved like all that burn and consumer stuff that we did.
It's a lot of work to reach consumers, and then, as you say, they don't pay.
Yeah. Now at that time, so we did manage to reach a ton of consumers. They didn't pay at that time. If you executed the same strategy today and you got the same number of users, I think you would be profitable immediately. But that's a different error.
Well, do you think they care that much? The consumers are that concerned with their security?
I don't think they care. But remember, you've got 100 million internet users or 150 million internet users in the United States, or maybe 200 million internet users in the United States. If you just take the few percent of those people that are most concerned about privacy and stuff like that, suddenly you got a user base of 5 million, 6 million people. And and it's pretty sticky application because the way our service worked is you used us to then access the rest of the web. So you're doing all your web page views were going through our service. And so people would be using us for like 100 clicks a day or something like that. So
do you have an example of a company that's doing that well now, that's making money from it?
I don't think so. There is a competitor that we had back in those days that's still working, still online. It's called the Anonymizer, and I think people still use it. And I think it's a profitable business, privately held. I met the founder once. So I think they've just survived all this, and they're doing okay. But nobody's really succeeded in really blowing it up into a big thing.
I'm going to see if I could do an interview with someone at Anonymizer. I used to use them, but never for security reasons. In fact, to be honest with you, I never really trusted them. What I use them for looking out websites that I didn't trust, or if I was going to go and vote for myself on Hacker News, I might route it through something like Anonymizer.
Weasley stuff.
Yeah. Okay, so you mentioned earlier that there was a painful moment when you realized that you're charging after consumers, that you're actually building up a following, a user base of consumers, but they're not profitable, and you have to change direction. Can you tell us about that realization and how you changed direction?
Yeah, it was the usual. Lose $1 on every transaction, but make it up in volume kind of thing. That a lot of people experienced this back in the day. We succeeded wildly in terms of getting users, but that was just eating up our cash reserves in terms of bandwidth costs and stuff like that. Actually, I imagine that would still be the case for YouTube if they hadn't been acquired by Google. I don't know how they make money on YouTube. Their bandwidth costs must be through the roof. But anyway, it was apparent to us we couldn't continue this way. We weren't going to become profitable on the consumer side. And there were some efforts at that time to see if there was interest in, say, Yahoo or by Yahoo or other portals to acquire us. So that they could have a kind of Yahoo branded privacy experience for users, stuff like that. And we had some pretty high level meetings. I shook Jerry Yang's hand and had a meeting with him at Yahoo, and we thought, oh hey, there's a chance we're going to get acquired here. But those things didn't play out, and so we had to make a very tough decision to just drop that business and head in the enterprise direction. And it was a tough decision, and we had to cut our team quite a bit after that decision. I'll never forget. So our offices, I'm sorry, are you in the Bay Area or?
Actually, I'm in Buenos Aires right now.
Oh, wow. Okay. So there's a Siebel building, which is in Emeryville. Emeryville is where Pixar is and a bunch of biotech companies just south of Berkeley. It's right near the Bay Bridge. And it's a beautiful little place. And we were right on the water. We had a beautiful office. And one day I had to, well, how do you fire people? Okay. You don't want to fire people in the middle of a work day with other people around. So you kind of wait till the end of the day. This is all, if you look up in management books, there's a whole algorithm for how you fire people, okay? But one of the problems we had was we had to fire a lot of people. We had to do it all at once, and there wasn't space in the office. So what we did is because we didn't want to call people in sequentially, so we basically brought a couple of guys. We just told a couple of guys to meet us outside, the group that we were going to let go, and we had a conversation out there. And I'll never forget how. It was a beautiful, sunny, idyllic day. We were standing next to the bay, but I was firing, 5 or 10 guys. And some of these guys were people I had known for years. And one of the guys actually started crying. And, I tell you, every time you hire somebody, you should picture that you might have to fire them. That forces you to be careful in the hiring. Because the most painful thing for me, at least as a CEO, that I ever had to do was fire somebody. And and you can't assign. I think you're not a man if you delegate that. Okay, you hired him, you brought him in. You should, you got to face him and tell him what's going on. And it's toughest thing I think for me. And anyway, so anybody who's ever done it,
I've got to say I've done it. It still haunts me. Actually,
yeah.
Now I'm starting to let it go, but it's haunted me for years.
Yeah,
in many ways, you feel like it's your own fault. I remember saying to one person, "You did nothing wrong. I'm the one who made a mistake here. I wish that maybe you did something wrong. It would have made it easier for us." Yeah, but I got to tell you, you're a terrific person.
I should differentiate between firing for cause, which is a totally different thing, and firing because my strategic decision didn't pay off, so we got to fire.
Yeah, that's a really painful. That's a really painful experience. In the movies, they make it out like it's easy. Like every businessman wants to fire everyone. Wake up in the morning, feel powerful by saying you're fired. In reality,
there are probably guys who are like that, but they're not going to make the best managers.
Yeah,
there probably are guys who enjoy the power. Actually, I would like to comment on that a little bit. The culture that we had in the company was always, and I think this is pretty prevalent in Silicon Valley, is that if somebody in the organization has a suggestion for how to improve something, doesn't matter what their rank is or their place in the hierarchy, they should just make that suggestion, and we're going to consider it on the merits. Every decision in the company is going to be argued on the merits, and it's never going to be somebody pulling. Ultimately the hierarchy is there, and somebody is the decision maker, but the argument is based on the merits, not based on your place in the organization. So we always had that in our culture.
So did you have a conversation inside the company about whether you should let go of people, whether you should redirect your energy towards enterprise?
That I think as a general conversation, it involved many people within the company, but as an ultimate management decision, it was really the senior management that made that decision.
Okay, all right. Beyond having to let people go, how hard was it to adjust? What else did you have to do?
Well, it was like, right angle turn, and we just had to go and start from zero. In the new space, we were starting to see some competitors. It was a pretty tight space. There were about 3 or 4 companies doing pretty much exactly what we were doing. So we were just in tough competition. We had to hire up enterprise sales guys, which we didn't have in our previous form of existence, and that was a totally different experience in learning how to deal with those guys. We built prototype, had to get some pilot sales, built it up to, I think, 1.5 million in total sales, where it was pretty clear that the product worked well. We had gotten into the different competitive matrices, that Gartner has and stuff. And so at that point, we were a viable acquisition candidate based on our technology. And so then we started that process.
Based on your technology? Or
based on the technology, and as proved out in, we had sold about 1.5 million in actual, by the way, it was the IP was all in software, but the actual thing that we sold was an appliance. It was just a one-use server thing.
Customers, it's really hard to go after enterprise customers. You can't call up a big company and say, hey, I've got this new hardware I want to sell you.
We were lucky in some ways. So some of these were just really hard sales to close. And our first sale, it turned out, in the building that we were in, next to the SIBO building, there was a medical insurance company, I think it was. And so they had a lot of proprietary information stored in their database that was being accessed by doctors and health administrators. And so we did a pilot with them, and it was lucky that they were in our building, because we could sell them. We could go over and say, hey, we're going to do this almost for free. Look how great this is going to be. Your users can do this. So that was like old-fashioned, I don't know what you want to call it, just salesmanship, just going there and shaking hands and trying to do it. And we were lucky that they were in our building. But what was on our side, and really ultimately I think has been shown in the development of this marketplace for this technology, is it's a natural idea. And so ultimately there were people looking for this technology at the same time that the companies were building it. So, it's a natural idea to say, well, we need some simple server-side thing that just lets all our users who now have web browsers, are starting to have web browsers, to come in and do stuff. All of our business partners should be coming in and do stuff with using their web browser instead of this kludgy IPsec VPN thing that is the current method. So we got contacted by people like the World Health Organization. Google was one of our customers. EMC was one of our customers. So a lot of those guys, it was driven by them thinking like, well, this should be technologically possible. Surely there's somebody out there selling this capability. And then they found us. And so we would just end up in bake-offs then with our other competitors. And often the customer was somebody who, on their side, they wanted to solve a problem. They could actually see it could be solved this way, and they're looking for the vendor to do it.
This was a world without the dominant Google that we know today. So they couldn't just go online and Google you. How would they even find that you guys were out there?
At this time, Google was, I think, dominant among the tech-savvy population, but not maybe dominant this is pre-IPO for them. But it was, so I think even at that time, we were using AdSense to get customers. And so people would search for certain keywords like SSL. SSL VPN wasn't a commonly used term, but certain keywords, and we would buy those and we would bid for those. And so we did get customers.
Pennies a click and then converting them into thousands of dollars.
Oh yeah, sales, right? Our average sale was like $100,000 or something, because we'd sell this little 1U, which cost us maybe a couple $1,000s in hardware, but it had all our IP in the software, and we'd sell that on a seat license basis. We'd sell, we could have a $250,000 sale based on 2 of these 1U appliances. So yeah, that's a pretty sweet.
I've got a note here to come back and talk to you about the transition back to school, to teaching. Why did you have to make that decision again? Because of school.
Okay, so at this point, we're competing well in this SSL VPN space. We have a potential closing a pretty big round, like $5-10 million round, with one of the big Sandhill shops. And at this time, I'm still the CEO. But what's happening now is my department chair is telling me I have to come back. You've been out 1.5 years, and you're going to have to resign or come back. And that's a typical story, actually. Universities are pretty rigid about this stuff. My wife is also a professor at the same university. So, unless she wanted to give up her career too, I had to go back to the university. I couldn't stay down in the valley anymore. And very tough decision. And at one point, the managing partner of this fund that wanted to put the money in, we had a very nice dinner in one of these, can't remember the name of the restaurant, but it's one of the standard restaurants where you eat with VCs down there. Anyway, so he calls me on the phone, and for some reason I think I'm back in Eugene. He calls me. I'm in my office. I'm actually sitting right where I'm sitting right now, and he says, "Hey, we really like you. We love the company. We think it's a great opportunity. We want to put the money in. We're not putting it in unless you're CEO." and we don't like the guy that you have slotted in to take your place. And that was a very tough decision. And the future of the company basically bifurcated on that point. So had we taken the money, we would have muscled up, and we probably would not have gone for an acquisition until much later, and would have been like $100 million, $200 million acquisition. As instead, because we didn't get that money, we had to look more immediately for an acquisition, and turned out to be a smaller acquisition. So my whole life basically, in that other parallel universe, I would be living a very different life right now.
So why'd you make that decision? Here you've got someone who's offering you money, who thinks so highly of you as an entrepreneur that he won't have anybody else in your place. You still have a possibility for incredible riches. Why give that up?
Well, part of it is it's a life choice, and I'm still, to this day, I'm still a professor. So I'm obviously intellectually interested in the kind of work that I do as a theoretical physicist, and I ultimately chose that and the family situation over staying in the company. And I became chairman of the board of directors, but I wasn't the CEO anymore. So it was a tough decision. I second guess it. Maybe I should have stayed.
Yeah. I actually had an incredible offer back at the height of the bubble. And I remember when the bubble burst and all my sales and all my customers were disappearing. I remember walking through the streets of Manhattan on my way into work and just saying, what did I do? Why didn't I take that offer? What's wrong with me? Do you ever have those moments too?
I do. I'm pretty happy with the way things turned out. So I shouldn't complain. I think maybe things could have turned out better had I stayed. But hey, life is like that, you can't really second guess.
You chose family, you're saying, and you chose security over building a business somewhere else.
Well, I think this might be hard to understand for people who aren't academic scientists, but there are a lot of people, if I walk down the hall over here, who would say things like, I don't really care about money. Money's not the measure of success. I care about the contributions I've made to this, research in fundamental physics. And so it's just different value system. You can't. Well, people are going to benefit down the road. We're benefiting. All the Moore's law growth in, computing power is what's powering us. And that's due to work done by, fundamental researchers 50 years ago. So,
When I was younger, I wouldn't have understood that at all. Now I understand. There are other interests. There are other aspects to life beyond business. Go figure, but it's true.
But having said all that, once being bitten by the entrepreneurial bug, I think it's just fantastic. I wouldn't, I'm still interested in starting companies, building companies. It's actually changed my whole view on how things are done in academia, how you should do things in your everyday life. Just the whole idea that you can make innovations and improve things, and that many innovations are just there ripe for the plucking and nobody's really pursuing them because people with the entrepreneurial mindset and spirit are a rare commodity. That observation definitely has stuck with me since.
Is there something that you're seeing right now in your work that you wish would be different, if it was a more entrepreneurial environment?
Yeah, I think academia is very ossified. I think university change is very slow. Managers at the university, the administration tend to be not entrepreneurial.
Is there a specific thing that just sticks in your craw?
Gosh, I'd have to think about it. I could probably list like 10 things,
okay.
but I don't know of a really great crystal clear example. But if you encounter a manager at a big established company or an administrator at a university, their incentive structure is just not the same as for you as an entrepreneur, because they're in a very stable environment. And what's the best thing that's going to happen? They're going to get a 10% raise and they're going to get promoted. That's the best thing that can happen to them. In that environment, why would you take a big risk on anything? Why wouldn't you just kind of go along with everybody else, try to shape it as best you can, but don't try anything dramatic? Because if you try something dramatic, you can get fired, right? But the upside is very capped.
Yeah.
So that's why most of the institutions that we deal with day to day are not dynamic. They're not like little startups, and that's why people love to be at these little startups.
I just want to thank a couple of people who are watching us live. Wesley Ross, who's telling people to come watch us, and Will Lamb, who's always out there watching us live and has been a big supporter. Thanks, guys. How did you get to be such a good entrepreneur, such a good CEO, that not only didn't your venture capitalists kick you out the way they often do, or at least back then they did, but they wanted you on and they were only going to put money in if you were there. How'd you get to be so good?
I don't think I'm that good.
So what was it about the job that you did that made them want you there?
It's a good question. I think some people have some personal attributes that other people find attractive. Like, I'm sure I've never met Steve Jobs, but I'm sure if I had a meeting with Steve Jobs, I would just be, I would be in the reality distortion field of Steve Jobs. And I think for some people, in some circumstances, when I meet them, they have some confidence in me and they're willing to make bets on it. I think it's very hit or miss. Like, sometimes I'll have a VC meeting and they'll be like, pass. Who are you? Get out of here. And sometimes they'll say, hey, we love you. We do want to invest, or we don't want, whatever. But so it does
there's
vary.
A large chemistry component to this.
There's a huge chemistry component. And I don't want to claim that
Is there something about you? Is it that you're really well thought out and so it's easy to understand where you're going and work together with you? Is it that you're decisive, that you come up with this, that you make decisions quickly? And so they wanted that.
I'd say a couple things. Number one, actually, experience as a teacher is key. Like, I often say that almost every meeting I take, whether it's a business meeting or whether, like, say I'm meeting with another company to tell them about our technology or communicate with my own team or with a VC, it's kind of a teaching thing, because nobody knows more about your business, your space, and your technology than you. And so you often have to, your job really in that 30-minute meeting is to convey as much as you can in digestible, bite-sized chunks to the other person. And if you're good at that, the other people will appreciate it. They'll say, wow, okay, I understood what that guy was trying to tell me. I actually understand the value proposition. A lot of times when they meet with academic scientists, they'll say, well, that guy was obviously smart. I can't quite tell what they're talking about. And that's terrible, because they obviously are not going to be able to invest based on that. But if they can walk out of the meeting saying, I understand what their basic innovation is and why it's got a shot, and therefore I'm going to invest. So I think that teaching ability is key. As far as decisiveness, I notice, like dealing with my wife and other people, that it's a rare ability to actually make decisions and not torture yourself for a long time about those decisions. I mean, of course, you can torture yourself a little, but I notice my wife, like, when she makes a decision, it really bugs her for weeks on end, and she revisits that decision again and again. Whereas I think if you're this kind of rational decision maker, you can say, well, we made the best decision at that time we could. I'm not going to kill myself over it. We did the best we could, and it's baked in the cake. We got to go now, So I think that discipline is rare. And I think in general, all the traits that make a good entrepreneur, they're rare at like the 10% level. I was recently talking to a guy called William Bernstein, who's a very famous investor. And he was saying, to be a good investor, there are traits that you need, but you only kind of need them at the 90th percentile level. So you need to be smart, but you don't need to be Albert Einstein. You need to be decisive, but you don't need to be the most decisive guy in the world. You need to have good interpersonal skills, but you don't have to be, an inspirational leader, But you need those things at a certain level. And since they're kind of roughly independent quantities, when you multiply, okay, 10% chance someone has this ability, 10% chance they have this. By the time you multiply them all together, you're talking about 1 in 10,000 people, or 1 in 1,000 people can really lead a startup, and do a good job of it. And I think that's actually true.
Well, all right, I hadn't heard of it that way, but it is true. Except I would also say that maybe you need to have one of those areas where you're almost the best. And drive.
Yeah. It's true. No, you should be. It would be great if you were exceptional at something. Like you had great technical chops, or you had great ability to sell or motivate, decision making. Those are all, it would be great if you could be really tops at something.
And I got to say too, you mentioned drive. Sometimes I talk to entrepreneurs here who'll talk about the painful times as they were building a business, or talk about the times where they lost one business completely, and then they'll talk about how they started the business that they're here to talk to me about. And it must sound to the audience sometimes like it's just a step along the way. But to the entrepreneur who feels it, it's a deep questioning of who they are. It's a real pain point that most people would experience and then back away from that fire forever. They would never want to get anywhere near business. What makes these guys extraordinary, I think, is that they feel all that and then they're somehow willing to continue.
Yeah, you have to be ready to come back for more. I mean, if you're a lifelong entrepreneur, you have to, and like in the current company that I'm doing with the same former student, Jim Hormuzdiyar, that we did SafeWeb with, every time we hit a tough patch, we're just like, well, we signed up for this. We signed up for it, right? You can't blame anybody. Nobody put a gun to your head and said, start a second company, right? We signed up for it.
There's a lot to be said for just knowing it's part of the process, because when you know it's part of the process, you don't question yourself as much. You don't say, well, maybe I'm not meant to be in this game. Maybe there's something wrong with me or this business.
Right.
You just accept that that's part of the process, and then you could get to the solution a little bit better,
exactly.
faster. All right. Before we get to this current company, which you brought up, let's talk about the sale. So you weren't going to be the CEO. Investors said, all right, then let's find a buyer. How did you go from deciding to find a buyer to finding Symantec specifically to buy your business?
So we actually, there are a number of points here. We did engage a small boutique investment bank that does mergers and acquisitions for tech companies. They're based in the Bay Area. I highly recommend them, but there's a handful of banks that do this. They take a transaction fee, so a success fee. It's relatively small if you have a good transaction. We worked with them. We met with a bunch of different companies in the space. We had two offers at the end. One was from Symantec, and the other was from another company called NetScreen. NetScreen was later acquired by Juniper, so all their technology is now in the Juniper stuff. So we had two offers and basically had to negotiate with both sides. And I'll tell you, the most stressful, other than having to fire people, the most stressful period in my life was the 30 days closing the acquisition. I can remember being on conference calls with 8 lawyers at a time. And you got lawyers representing the management team, you got a lawyer representing the firm, you got a lawyer representing their firm, you got an IP lawyer. It's incredible the amount of work that goes into this stuff.
Yeah, it sounds expensive too.
Yeah, it is.
All right. Actually, do you still have a contact at that firm? I'd love to do an interview with someone who helps
Yes.
entrepreneurs sell their businesses.
Yes. The firm is called Intelligent Capital. They're based in San Francisco. And there were two partners, Chris and the other guy was named Rick Marshall. And I think either one would make a great interview.
Can I hit you up for an intro after the interview?
Sure. Absolutely.
Okay. I'd love it.
Yeah.
Okay, so you sold the business for $26 million. You got $10 million in investment. How much of that do you end up with at the end of the day?
We did pretty well because the first amount of money that we raised was kind of at bubble valuations. So we didn't give up that much equity. And so we did pretty well. I don't want to say exactly how well I did, but what's the right way to characterize it? Pretty good chunk of that went to me. So, I'm much better off than the average physics professor.
So we're saying more than 30% of what was left went to your pocket. More than $3 million you ended up with.
Yeah, that's the right ballpark.
Okay. Yeah. Wow. So you really did okay then.
Yeah, there's a presentation. If you look on my webpage and you look under talks, there are some presentations that I've given over the years, mainly to encourage academic scientists and people like that to get involved in entrepreneurship and start companies. And I go through some math there for how the different investment rounds dilute you out. And those are not our numbers, but they're not that far off from our numbers. So anybody who wants to look at that math can go there and look at it. I noticed that a lot of beginning entrepreneurs are a little bit naive about all this stuff, and it's good to actually go through the math in your head. Experienced guys know immediately, they know what their stake in the company is, and they know how this deal is going to dilute it out, and that kind of it's very simple math. But that venture math, you can immediately tell whether people can do it in their head or not, and that tells you whether they've been through these kind of deals and stuff like that. So,
yeah, you know what it is. To me, it's still impressive when I see these guys who have been funded have conversations over coffee and do the math in their heads right away and understanding liquidation preferences and
exactly.
detail and that detail.
There's a lot of I would not even call it strategy. It's just really tactics. Well, if I accept this provision, then if the company goes this way, it's going to hurt me. But if it goes this way, it's not going to hurt me. And people who are experienced understand all that stuff right away, and VCs for sure understand that stuff right away. So,
right, Moses is watching us live. He goes by Monocat on Twitter. He's saying, do universities get a cut from professors who start a business while on the job? Especially
that's a great question. That's a great question. If I had been a computer science professor, then the IP agreement I signed with my university would have covered the innovation. However, because I'm a physics professor, I was able to point out to them this has nothing to do with my core research, which is on black holes and quarks and stuff. And therefore, I didn't actually get anything to the university. I did donate a chunk of money to Caltech to establish a scholarship, but I didn't actually have to give anything to the university, my employer. Whereas I think, like, if you were a Stanford CS professor, which is, the source of many successful companies, like VMware, for example, that guy probably had to negotiate something to free up the IP rights from the university because it's related to his core academic research.
All right, let's talk a little bit about what you're doing now. So you mentioned that you're working on a new company. I'm looking here at my notes to make sure that I'm up to speed. This is robotgenius.net.
That's right. So, we're gluttons for punishment. We took a year off, Jim and I, and then we decided to start another company. And again, I don't know if you want to get into all the technology details of what it is, but basically, it's a technology for fighting malware. And the basic problem is this: if malware gets on your system, it can then subsequently, without your knowledge, download more components onto the system. And that's why people have so much trouble getting rid of malware, because you run that semantic scanner on the system or the Norton scanner, and it's going to catch some pieces of what has been installed, but it's not going to catch everything. And sophisticated malware now is so good that it will then just regenerate the pieces that have been cleaned by the scanner. So that technology is basically dead end technology. And actually, if you talk to people in the industry, really, over beer or in an honest way, they'll tell you that's life end. That's at the end of the road. Okay. And so we were trying to go beyond that. And the basic idea for us was if you could put a layer in your OS that was at a deep enough level that it could see everything happening in your system, it could monitor what every process on your Windows machine is doing, and would record in a very precise way what had happened. You could then reverse chains of events that had occurred on your system without affecting other things. And that is essentially what we built. That's what Robot Genius is. And so it's primarily designed as a security tool, but then it has other applications as well for just monitoring what's going on in the machine or remote management, et cetera, et cetera. And it turns out it took us much longer to solve the problem than we thought. We were overly optimistic at the beginning in terms of how easy it was going to be.
Why? What was the trouble?
It just is such a you have to really the implementation of what I just described really depends on the nitty gritty of Windows internals, and we had to pitch it toward Windows because that's really the market. And it just took us a long time to understand. We now think we understand all the ways in which a malicious program on a Windows machine could either get root capability or take control of other processes. And we believe that our software actually blocks each and every one of those methods. So we think we have actually a comprehensive way of making a protective shield for Windows. Now, there are situations where the user legitimately wants to do things that would penetrate that shield, like if you have to install a driver, you have an HP printer or something. But those cases tend to be relatively rare. So the trade-off for our product is if you never override a warning from the Robot Genius client, we guarantee we can reverse anything that's happened on your system. However, if you do override a warning, then we can't guarantee it. Because if you override a warning, it might have been a benign HP printer driver that you put in, but it might be real rootkit. And at that point, it's going to get underneath us, and then we can't do anything. So it's a different value proposition. Symantec and McAfee and all these guys, they would like to pretend that, well, you don't have to make any decisions. The thing is just there, and then it can save you. But that's just actually completely wrong. And so really the best you can do is to say, I could protect you always, but then you would lose a little bit of functionality, like you wouldn't be able to install a printer driver when you wanted to, or there's going to have to be a decision point where you say, well, I trust HP, I'm going to install this driver, but because I overrode the warning from Robot Genius, there's something potentially catastrophic here that's happening. So it's just a different trade-off. It's been quite difficult to educate people on this shift in value proposition, even people who are in security in the industry. So, I would say we haven't really succeeded. We've succeeded on the technical side. I think everything I've said to you on the technical side is correct, but on the business side, we have not really succeeded as a company yet. And so,
because
Well, one mistake we made is we thought, oh, if I build a better mousetrap and I bring it to the mousetrap producing company, they'll say, hey, that's a better mousetrap. I would like to have that mousetrap. Here's your 100 million, whatever, and give it to me. Now, it turns out because we went through about a year and a half ago, we went through some pretty serious acquisition talks with, a lot of the big names in the security space. It turns out these guys have a established product. That's their main revenue driver in the case of Symantec and McAfee. And it's built a certain way. And any change they want to make in, say, the core Norton technology, they've got to, even the internal changes that they want to make, they've got to put it in their product roadmap like a year or 2 years in advance. So their ability to digest a radical new technology is very low. They're kind of locked in by their existing product. So it's very tough for them. None of them, in fact, they basically said this to us, we're not going to jettison our cash cow existing product, even if you bring me a better, radically different mousetrap. So then you're left with this other option, which is, well, you could try to basically build a large competitor, take it to market yourself, and just because it's a better mousetrap, you're going to beat these other guys. The problem there is that it is very difficult for the average user to figure out. If I give you two possible security products for your machine, how do you know which one's better? It's a very difficult situation for the consumer to judge quality. And I would submit that even the analysts, the people who review security products for the major magazines and stuff like that, they really don't know what they're doing. And they basically do the following kind of tests. They have like a sample set of like 10 pieces of malware. They try it out. They look to see which scanners can deal with it, which ones, it's a very superficial kind of analysis. And so we're in a situation where the better mousetrap it isn't easy to recognize that something is a better mousetrap, even if you have one. So we're kind of in that situation. Now it turns out that, and this is actually reminiscent of our previous startup. It turns out there are many enterprise management applications of our technology. So if you just install our client on lots of machines, like say you're in a company and there are 1,000 desktops in your company, you want to manage them. Our client can do all kinds of things, like it can enforce a rule like no iTunes on any machine in this, no Skype client on any machine. Show me the last 100 pieces of software installed on any machine in my company, and let me see. I want to remove these 50 because I don't like them. So all those kind of management applications are also things we can do with our technology. We're actually moving more in that direction.
So now you and Jim are doing the same thing as before, going towards enterprise.
It's like, well, we screwed it up. So we screwed it up. We invested a lot of blood trying to solve something. Now we see the structural obstacles to succeeding with that strategy. So now we're trying something else.
All right. Well, how long has the business been around?
Well, we've been around since 2005, so it's been a while.
And did I ask if it was bootstrapped yet?
No, it's venture funded, actually. Okay.
So. And so you're still a professor. You've got a new business, venture funded, and you're able to make them both work at the same time?
Sort of.
How? What are the challenges now?
Don't sleep.
I see.
No, I mean, it's just you're super busy. And you're always feeling like, at least for me, you're always feeling like, wow, I'm not doing well enough here. I wish I had more time to do this. I'm not doing well enough here. It's tough, but I chose it, so I can't complain.
All right. Well, we said before the interview started that I would ask you at the end if there's anything that I missed. Is there anything that you think entrepreneurs need to learn? So, what do you think? I think we covered a lot here.
Yeah, it's a tough. Trying to think that the talk that I usually give on this subject, what are the things I emphasize? A lot of things I'd say in that talk are oriented toward people who are scientists, but they're not necessarily entrepreneurs, and they're things to encourage people to go out and take risks and stuff like that. And I think maybe your audience doesn't need to hear that, so they probably already know that.
I'll tell you what, I'm going to link over to your website, and the presentations are on there. And if somebody needs to reach out to you, has any questions, is there a way that they can connect with you?
Oh, absolutely. They can anybody can shoot me an email, and I actually blog. I have a blog, and although not all posts have to do with companies and startups, a fair number of them have to do with issues related to that. So. And
you blog pretty regularly, right?
I do, every couple days or something.
And I think you said on a recent post that you're not on Twitter, that you're intentionally staying away from it.
Okay, I'll just tell you this funny. I have to tell you this funny story.
Yeah,
I was at this O'Reilly get together called Foo Camp, and I met this guy called Evan Williams. Okay. And at the time, I knew Blogger. I knew about Blogger. I used Blogger because Blogger it was acquired by Google. So that was his earlier company. And so I started talking to him, and I said, well, what are you doing now, Evan? And he starts describing stuff to me. And it's funny because he was actually doing something called Odeo, which is a podcast startup. And I don't know where that went. But as part of Odeo, while they're goofing around, they built Twitter. And he's telling me about Twitter. And in my mind, I'm thinking, who would ever use that? I literally, in my mind, said, who would use that? Who wants to send out stupid short messages to a million, And it just shows I have no Web 2.0. I know my limitations. I'm not a Web 2.0, whatever. So I said, but I didn't ask him that because that was too rude. But then I said, well, how are you? But I did ask. What I did verbalize to him is, well, how are you going to monetize that? Which is, I guess, something they're still dealing with. So anyway, I guess I'm not a Twitter guy, but
and you didn't recognize one of the big challenges, which is how
exactly. Yeah.
And apparently, we're going to find out this year how they're going to monetize it.
I'm sure they're going to succeed, but yeah. I mean, if nothing else, they're going to get bought by somebody. So.
All right. Well, I'm looking forward to seeing what happens with. Is the company called Robot Genius?
Robot Genius is the company.
So I'm looking forward to finding out. Sorry.
Wish us luck.
I'm wishing you luck, and I'm going to watch on the sidelines and let me know if there's anything I could do to help out, or let my audience. I don't know how we could do that, guys. Reach out to him. Check out his website. Check out the business. Stay on top of his blog. I think you're a very interesting blogger. I love the technology that you bring to your blog. What am I thinking of? The glasses, for example. The post.
Oh, that was an amazing thing to learn about. It's another example of entrepreneurism. Like, somebody had to take the initiative on that.
These are glasses that you don't need to go to an eye doctor to have fitted. You just can wear the pair and then start adjusting them.
Yeah, the focal length changes. So these are really oriented toward poor people in the third world. These glasses apparently can be produced for like €4. So you put it on the kid, you cover one eye, and he can adjust it himself so that it's focused, and then he can just wear them. And it'll solve vision problems for hundreds of millions of people in the third world. So I even think there might be, I was talking to my brother about this, there might even be interest in the developed world for these glasses. I wouldn't mind having a pair of adjustable glasses.
I agree. I think so too. But I wonder if you could just go into a store and buy glasses.
Well, my brother and I we were talking about it. We're going to email these guys and say, hey, we'll buy, if you want to send us 10 pairs, we'll buy 10 pairs because, we'll pay you a big multiple of the €4 or whatever. I just like to have them to play with.
Actually, yeah, I like that. I think if they put it online, a lot of people would go out there just to buy a pair and try them out.
Absolutely, yeah.
If nothing else, it'd be good backup glasses.
Yeah, exactly. And one of the things I said in my blog post is, if society melts down, you're going to want, if you need lenses, you're going to want to have a huge stack.
I thought you said when society melts down.
No, if.
All right, if. All right, well, thank you for doing this interview. Thank you guys all for watching. Give me feedback on this interview. Come back to Mixergy and give me feedback, and I'll see you all in the comments.
Bye. My pleasure. Thanks, guys.